It's delightful to welcome you here, and thank you for taking the time to chat to me, because obviously we talked a lot in the different forums, the British Film Commission forums, and you've articulated very helpful views about how your perspective. And I sort of wanted to ask you, I'm kind of kicking off really by asking you, not so much for a tour of the horizon, but when we spoke, you were actually being quite optimistic, not being negative, because obviously there's a tendency in our industry to be quite, doom and gloom about the future and where things are. But perhaps I can start by asking you, sort of, not putting you on the spot, but where do you think from what you're seeing in terms of the workflows, what you're seeing in terms of your clients, what's the picture from your point of view right now in terms of your perspective on where the UK industry is?
Okay. Thank you so much. And it's really, really lovely to be here this afternoon. I think for me, it's every threat is also an opportunity. And I genuinely believe that. And I think there have been and probably continue to be what many people would understandably and validly perceive as threats to our industry. Around the downturn in commissioning, around tightening of budgets, around the development of AI, the diversification of, how we consume content. What is it? 1 in 4 under 25-year-olds never both watches terrestrial television or indeed the streamers. They pick everything up on YouTube and other platforms. But all of those, if you look at them differently, are actually opportunities. And to my mind, those out there in the workforce who can be canny, who can be inquisitive, who can upskill, and I think we'll come on to talk a bit more about that, and be adaptable, there is a lot of opportunity at the moment. There's a real kind of, not merging, but cross-pollination between the areas of film, television, increasingly games, but also now short form, the creator economy, etc. So all of that presents more opportunity. But one has to be adaptable and really understand what one's skill set is and the skills you have and how you make those transferable into other areas. So, yeah, I think it is a world of opportunity, but that doesn't mean it's straightforward. A lot of people, when I started as an agent, freelancers would have very linear careers. They would start off, at the bottom in a department and they would move on up working in film. And if you worked in film, you never worked in television. And if you worked in television, you certainly couldn't work in film. Those barriers are all breaking down.
So that means that people that you represent, but generally in terms of people thinking about a career in the industry, let's say below the line career, working in craft or technical, have to think differently about how they progress.
And more strategically. Yeah. And look to... One of the things, and I think I've banged on about this to you before, Adrian, one of the things we've always done in this industry is we employ on credits. Or they've got this credit or they've got that credit. Therefore, they must be jolly good at what they do. I think increasingly now and helpfully, we are looking at job descriptions. And we're looking at breaking down, what are your skills? Okay, so your role is this. Your role may be trainee or second assistant camera or whatever it is. But actually, what are the skills you have? And how do you manifest those? And where else might they be used? So to think about your own skill set and be a little bit strategic. As I said, be nosy. I mean, I've become slightly obsessed with the whole AI subject. It's like, I cannot sit like King Canute on the beach and go, the tide will not come in. The tide is coming in. I've done a lot of panels now, or been in the audience for a lot of panels, conferences, breakfasts, etc. And the message I'm getting right across the board is this is not an either or. This is going to be a hybrid model. So again, there is threat, but there is also opportunity.
So does that mean, in terms of the people that you represent in that sense, is that the kinds of people you're talking to, the kinds of employers you're talking to, has widened in terms of, because it's not just, well, okay, if it's that role, then the people I'm talking to are film and television companies and that's who I'm talking to. But you're not
No.
Presumably you're not doing that.
No, I mean, that is still at this moment in February 2026, the core of our business. But what we are seeing, is around the edges, companies specialising in short form, branded content, internet-only content, vertical dramas, is also coming into play. But also the canny, established film and TV companies are also looking at that different content. Most of the big studios now in America, to my understanding, have departments working, in short form content and even in vertical drama. Vertical drama started in Southeast Asia, has come into America. It's still pretty new, and bluntly, the quality is not great most of the time, but without naming names, a couple of very established, respected TV and film production companies are now looking at their first vertical dramas. And imagine a world in 5 years' time where those vertical dramas actually become a training ground in the way that daytime drama, continuing drama, soaps have always been for people. Because, as you referenced earlier, we need that ladder. We need the shows, the indie films, whatever, that people can work on to get the skills that enable them then hopefully to work, if they wish to, on those big American studio films and high-end drama coming into the country.
And in that sense, in terms of the audience, let's talk about the suppliers in that sense, and whether it's HE, FE, whether it's training providers. What that seems to imply then is that as we progress in this new world, and different forms of content, that obviously people do need, whether it's, if you're going to be a costume designer, you need a certain level of craft skills and technical skills, the same as if you're going to be a DOP or you're going to be in production design. But what you're suggesting is that alongside that, yes, as part of that, that the institutions that are providing this training also need to think and inject into the minds of the trainees that, well, it's not, that's really critical that you gain that knowledge and that skills and that technical training, but you also need to think about things, other soft skills and other digital skills that you can have as well.
Yeah. And if you are working in costume, where does AI come into that? Where can that help you? Not to take your job, and there are certain parameters you need to work within. If you're going to use a large language model, make sure you pay a subscription for it so you have a walled garden. I'm sure there's a lot in the audience who understand way more than I do about this. So, there are certain cautionary notes around this. But what are the ways in which it helps your creativity? Not replaces your creativity. Because actually, one of the fascinating things I've learned around AI is, what large language models do is they take all the knowledge out there and they bring it to the middle, to the median point. So it is about convergence, always convergence. Human creativity is about divergence, diverting from the norm. So it still needs those human skills. And actually, I think that's the other part of the equation, isn't it? That in terms of training and upskilling, management, leadership, the ability to collaborate, as AI takes precedence in some of those kind of process roles, the skills that are going to be really important. And what is film, television, games making? It's profound collaboration. If you want to work on your own, you're going to be a novelist. This is about people working together. So those human skills, which I think for a long time we didn't probably value as highly as we should. Now, again, upskill, understand how to lead a team and the challenges of doing that.
And are you having that conversation with your clients?
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And, beyond that, with certain of our clients, we are also working with executive coaches, etc., to say, okay, you're moving from a mid-range level to a head of department. What are the skills you're going to need to manage? I remember one of my designers a few years ago, she'd been working as a designer, but on sort of tiny little independent films, like you were mentioning, with a small team. And she then got employed on a big, fantastic Amazon our TV show. And I remember her phoning me up and she said, I've got a team of 66 people in my department. I don't know how to manage this. And we got her some training about that. And I know now various, institutions, organisations are providing that training. And that is great and really important.
And that's, I mean, obviously that's I mentioned, continuous professional development, because that seems to me, and certainly with the height of the boom a few years ago and even now, that was the big thing that everyone was talking about, was people being essentially promoted incredibly rapidly beyond their skills and expertise, not necessarily their skills, but beyond their
political capacity a lot of the time. Because, what is it really, the difference in a lot of senses of dealing with a big American show is you're managing a lot of exec producers, you're managing the studio back in the States, all of those things.
Yeah. So, that is, so it's not just in terms of CPD and moving upwards. It's not just, well, you're going to need some additional, say, technological training. It's actually about that delegation, management, working collaboratively, all of that complexity of team management that somebody won't necessarily have done before.
Yeah, absolutely. And doesn't, to some people it does come naturally, but to a lot of people who are creatives or incredibly skilled technically, it doesn't. So go learn it. Don't be ashamed that you need to learn those skills. They're valuable skills to have.
So that's obviously a pointer for and I think it's not so unfamiliar, I don't think, to institutions, but it's definitely reinforcing that point that institutions, when they are training people, even whether it's top-up training or whether it's new entrant training, they need to at least be indicating to the people that they're training that this is a ladder. Yeah. This is a ladder where you're going to need these additional skills that aren't just technological, aren't just technical, aren't craft, but things that they won't necessarily have thought about at all. And they need to think about it themselves, and the institutions need to be pointing in that direction.
And have that sort of toolkit available. And I think that's also, you mentioned mentoring. I think that's where good mentoring, best practice mentoring can be incredibly valuable. Because again, I think on people's journeys, somebody more senior, not necessarily years and years more senior, that can often be too much of a skills gap, that their journey through the industry was probably very different than the younger person's will have been. But people a few years ahead of you, what did they, if you are looking at people who you aspire to have a similar career to, what's in their toolkit? How did they get there, and what skills did they need in order to kind of navigate? I really think planning. We have our own in-house trainee scheme at Sara Putt Associates, and what we do with our trainees every year is we get them to write down and acknowledge in that group what their ambitions are for that year and for 3 years. Right. Okay. And there is something about holding yourself to account if you've kind of expressed it out loud. And it's then you can reverse engineer. All of this is an art rather than a science. It's challenging. I'm not suggesting it isn't. But if you have a sense of where am I going, then you kind of know the skills that you need to get there. I think too many freelancers have felt for too long that they are blown by the winds of circumstance. Here's a job, I'm offered a job, I'll take a job. Rather than actually, as somebody very wisely said to me, you only get so many yeses in a career. Use them well.
And this is a little aside question, but I wanted to ask it because most people, I suspect a lot of people in this room currently aren't necessarily represented. And I'm not asking you how you get represented. What I'm interested in is you have an internal trainee scheme, and because obviously the industry, and I think you just opened an office, in Europe,
Amsterdam,
and you're expanding your ambit across Europe. That need for representation doesn't seem to be lessening; it seems to be increasing. So does that mean your profession? Because I'm interested. We've been talking about other, but in terms of your profession, that you're having to seek out people that you can train. Because I can't think of a course in the UK that trains
agent to be an agent.
No,
just need to be very good at having lunch with people. My son, aged 3, when asked what I did, said she talks on the phone a lot and she has lunch with people. very good at it. No, as far as I'm aware, there is no training. I actually took myself off more for running a business, and I took myself off years ago to Cranfield Management School. And I did like a mini MBA, which is based on your own business. And I found that so, so helpful. I mean, it was absolutely game-changing for me. But yes, I think the need for representation, the need for, I hope, that model of a co-pilot, a co-strategist, I can't say it, somebody to do the strategy with you, as well as, the thing about being an agent is it's not about getting people jobs. Good people will get jobs. What we do is maximize your opportunities for getting those jobs by putting you in the right rooms with the right people. And we do help you create a strategy around your career. And we're there for the bad as well as the good. And there's been a lot of bad over the last few years. There's been very tough times for a lot of our clients. And I wish we could have made it better. But, we couldn't a lot of the time because the work wasn't out there. But what we could do is suggest going and upskilling, going and looking at this, going and thinking about that. We had people in costume departments actually building relationships through going to networking events, etc., with the games industry and getting work doing consultancy on kind of, costumes for the games industry. Those costumes were created in computers, but they still needed to be created and designed by somebody. So those kind of opportunities. And I'm finding the vertical drama thing. I've had 2 young producers that we represent go in for interviews to produce vertical dramas, literally in the last couple of weeks. It'll be interesting. And these are with very, valid companies and known companies. So it'll be interesting to see how things like that pan out.
And sort of following that thought on Huge Again, we've already touched on it a couple of times, but let's talk about it a little bit more, because I think that there is obviously in the industry, there are quite schizophrenic perspectives on AI. Visual effects companies will tell us, and I absolutely believe, and they know more about this than me, that it's absolutely critical to their work. They have to have. They can't do their jobs for film and television without being able to use AI technology. And actually, they've always kind of used it. It just wasn't called AI back in the day. But
I think since we've named it, we've all got a lot more nervous about
exactly. So it's going to be there. It's going to be a feature of our work life. But what I'm interested in, and I definitely share this with you, is I'm interested in the fact that we're obviously concerned about IP and protection of,
That's one very specific thing.
It is, and protection of IP, and we know that performers in front of the camera are very concerned about the use of their image and IP and data, and completely respect that. But what I hear from you, I think, is that what AI potentially offers is a whole additional, or a better phrase, toolkit for creative practitioners in our industry to do things more imaginatively, differently, more in more exciting ways that we're not
for young filmmakers at a much smaller budget as well. I doubt now and we represent a lot of producers. My producers, when pitching, I think all of them now use AI to create pitch decks. It's then, and as many of you will be aware, it's about the prompting. Any idiot can do it first time round, and it will give you something very bland and anodyne. The skill in working with those large language models is to know how to ask it to give you what you need in a properly creative and divergent rather than convergent manner. But say you work in the sound department, and this is a conversation I was having with one of our sound trainees recently, is, how is AI going to affect your department? In 5 years' time, how is the capturing of sound? I was going to say, how is it going to look? But you know what I mean. How is it going to sound? How is it going to be done? Is the emphasis going to shift from production sound more to post-production sound? I don't know. But if I were working in the sound department, those are the questions I'd be asking and trying to kind of work out what skills I need, not to have to make a decision one way or the other, but to keep my options open.
And you mentioned the whole creator economy, and that seems to be something, again, that we're all going to have to engage with and deal with because of the relentless rise of YouTube and TikTok and what's going on there. And actually, I think it's going to be a question for all of us about providing creators with additional skills, so that they can expand what they're doing.
You know, to put it bluntly, they're coming out of their bedrooms,
right.
You know, and starting, a lot of them, to work with bigger teams, to work with camera crews, etc. And also, you know, a lot of these young people are very dismissed by the mainstream industry as, you know, Joe Bloggs sitting in his underpants in his bedroom playing a game and everybody watching it. Actually, a lot of these are incredibly talented individuals who are presenters, performers, producers, directors, editors. You know, they're doing a lot of stuff already, but they then, when they're working on a sort of bigger scale, realise they can't do it all, so need more of a team around them. You know, and certainly somebody like Alison Lomax, the MD of YouTube over here, she absolutely doesn't see it as an either or. Well, you know, those creators want to work in the mainstream creative economy, and they want to bring people from this part of the world into their world as well.
I mean, we're going to have to wrap. We're almost out of time, ridiculously. Wrap up soon. But I just wanted to kind of ask you. Bearing in mind, you have a very sophisticated picture of the changes going on, and you're representing a range of different people engaged in different elements of our industry. What your advice to that there's people that I think we got some of it because you've said, you know, be flexible, be adaptable. Be inquisitive. Don't just get trained on this. And again, with the providers looking at how they can additionally work and link up on all the soft skills rather than just on the technical training. And you said, you know, moving away, and I think this is really interesting, and I've been in some discussions about this, about how our industry, very nepotistic in terms of the way it does and doesn't advertise jobs, the way it is entirely credit and, you know, the person I worked with last time I want to work with again based. Do you think we are starting to move away from that? And do you think, therefore, that will create more inclusive opportunities for the workforce?
I really, really hope so. You know, it is hard. I'm aware, in representing a lot of production people, that, you know, often commissions are gained or greenlits are gained last minute, and you are then trying to crew up a pace. And yes, of course, then you go, I know Joe, let's give Joe a call. But if we can, you know, create a little bit more structure. I mean, all of this I see as the ongoing professionalising of our industry here, because we are at that intersection, aren't we, in film, TV and games, where art and commerce kind of interlink, and that's quite a complicated area. But I think we do need more employment practices. You know, I would certainly say that companies have got a lot better at that, in the way also that people are treated on set and in productions. But if we could get to things like job descriptions, proper interviews, I think we would become a much more inclusive industry. And I do see signs of that happening.
I think at this point, I've got to say, thank you very, very much for being our special guest, and can we have a very large round of applause for Sara Putt? Thank you.